Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't stop me, you can't stop me now. Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't lock me, you can't lock me down. I will not lay down my arms. Ready to be covered in scars. 'Cause I will always be a warrior. Late nights, get lost, hard work, the cost. Can't quit, can't stop. This world all cut off. Don't have time to waste, not now. Need to find a way to get out. 'Cause I'm gone in deep. Get lost in the weeds. You know it's all about the conquest. What's next? You gotta put the work in like you're obsessed. Think about what you want, what's your future. What kind of person would it take to seduce her? So what's next? Be obsessed with winning and your success. Make progress, the sight is never promised. So feel blessed, live life, don't be too cautious. Trust the process. In too deep, I'll never quit. I wanna see this through.
Rhett McLaughlin, welcome to the show.
And I will hold my head up high. Got what it takes to fight and survive. Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't stop me, you can't stop
Hey,
me now.
sound?
I will
Okay,
always
good,
be a
good, sound.
warrior. You can't
Check
lock
this
me,
out. We now have
you can't
lighting.
lock me down. I
That's
will
new.
not lay down my arms.
Yeah.
Ready to be covered in scars. 'Cause
So how y'all doing? I know I don't do live streams as regularly as I used to. My new work schedule is pretty tough, and on my day off, I end up falling asleep and sleeping in. So, but my financial woes are slowly going away, so let's be grateful for that. Anyway, all right. So we're gonna be listening to Alex O'Connor talk to Good Mythical Morning. I was gonna ignore this video, to be honest about it, but then I saw Gavin do a video on it, so I almost initially knee-jerk reaction style want to do a counter. So let's check that out. Hi, sweetie. All right, so let's start with that. Let's see what happens. I don't know how far we're going to go in this video, but hopefully it'll be good. Of course, I'm going to be commenting all along the way, so if you want to watch it without commentary, go watch the video on Alex O'Connor's channel.
Thanks for having me, man.
I can't believe you nearly made us change the tabletop to something cleaner.
We do have something that's more professional.
This is beautiful.
I mean, welcome to our space.
Yeah, thanks for hosting me here. I usually open the show by saying,
I got to confess, I didn't like Good Mythical Morning. I didn't like their show. I didn't like their content. So,
saying something like, thanks for being here or welcome to the show. And I've done that on a few occasions in other people's sets and other people's houses, and they kind of look at me a little bit blankly. So I'm sure you know what I mean, but thanks for having me. You got a lot of character on this table. This is like a who's who of
early
YouTube,
YouTube.
decades ago.
Yeah.
You were pointing out like the Fine Bros here, and I saw like I Just Seen over there. It's like a real old school thing. Why did it stop? What happened?
We kind of ran out of people to talk to. Honestly, the guest-based, we started our podcast as a guest-based show.
Yeah.
We thought that we would be like the Mark Maron for internet personalities.
Sure.
There's two issues. Number one, there's only so many, especially back in the day, only so many interesting internet personalities to talk to that were also willing to come into our studio out here. And then there's some dynamic that happens when two people are interviewing one person.
Yeah.
And we were like, this is not...
Yeah, I've seen that kind of thing before. Like a lot of other shows have multiple hosts, but there's like one main guy maybe. But having two people, it's kind of tricky. There are podcasts that do it.
Link and I are always both trying to be the main guy. That's our problem.
Yeah.
We've made a career of it. But on a podcast...
It's the same thing interviewing two people. I've done that a few times as well, like when I had Cliff and Stuart Connectley on.
Yeah.
They work quite well as a pair, but it's quite difficult to know like where to frame your
And we're on the other side of that quite a bit, right? I mean, like
I bet, yeah.
99% of any interviews that I'm a part of, Link's right, always right here. You know, we have to sit as Rhett and Link. We're very precise about
Yeah,
it.
do you feel a bit naked?
again, this stuff is just kind of boring to me, but Let's skip ahead just a little bit. We're at 2. Let's get to the 30-minute part. 4. Let's go to 4.
We would basically, the story would go, so we went to engineering school. We were engineers for a while, and then we became YouTubers. It was a very simple, easy to understand story. When the reality was, well, all throughout that time, we were involved in Christian ministry. We were very involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. And in between being engineers and being professional YouTubers, we were professional Christians. We worked full time with Campus Crusade for Christ as, campus missionaries, for lack of a better word. And our ministry was essentially using our comedy to help Christian students
I didn't find them very funny.
figure out how to talk about their faith.
Huh.
So we would literally, we didn't put on like big.
I didn't find them funny, and I found their show boring. Honestly, and even this is gonna hurt some people's feelings. I didn't like the Hank Green stuff either. I thought he was boring as well. I liked his individual stuff, and I thought the stuff he was talking about was interesting. But I didn't think he was interesting, and I thought him and his brother were really boring. So, yeah, I didn't like either one of these setups. I know this is like old YouTube. These are not what YouTube is about anymore. But yeah, Good Mythical Morning and the Hank Green brothers, the Dear Hank stuff, just nah.
Bait and switch evangelistic shows that you're supposed to invite like non-Christians to. We were like, hey, let's do something where we kind of come into their typical weekly meeting and we do something fun that it's got music and video and that's helping them kind of see differently the way that they approach evangelism. And the only reason that I'm doing what I do today is because of my background, because of all the experience that we had coming up in that, in that setting. So it just felt disingenuous to not talk about it.
Yeah.
It just began to, it began to kind of press on me. Like, this is such a, and also in the meantime, I had been through this complete deconstruction and essentially a deconversion. And so it's like, I kind of have to tell the story of the background while simultaneously telling the story of why I no longer believe it.
Yeah.
And so,
So deconstruction doesn't mean deconversion. I don't like that people like to conflate those two. I know in evangelical circles that's the way that they do things, but you can deconvert and become a Catholic. You can you can deconstruct and become a Catholic. You can deconstruct and become Jewish. Deconstructing all the way back to the bottom and then rebuilding up takes you back to the roots, but those roots are alive. Catholicism still exists. Eastern Orthodoxy still exists. Orthodox Judaism still exists. Heck, if you go far enough back, paganism is still alive and well. So to think that deconstruction means that you automatically become an atheist is just a complete non sequitur, and it's untrue. It's just a lie. I don't like that evangelicals conflate those two things.
but it wasn't like we got to go out there and like get on this. There was, by the way, not really a deconstruction train to get on at the time. It wasn't, there were some people who had talked about it, but I wasn't paying attention to that. I wasn't interested in that. I didn't know who had deconstructed publicly. I didn't know much about the word deconstruction. So it wasn't
Apparently not.
I want to be a part of a movement, or I see myself as part of a movement or a spokesperson for that. It was like, we need to be honest with our audience.
Yeah.
Let's just tell the story.
Campus Crusade for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
What is that about?
Yeah, I never heard of that either.
Well, let's see if I can remember exactly, because I used to have to get up at the weekly meeting and say this. Campus Crusade for Christ is an interdenominational Christian organization founded in 1951 by Bill and Vonette Bright.
Wow.
Our philosophy is threefold: to win, build, and send. Win students to Christ, build them up in their faith, and send them out to continue the win, build, send process.
How's that working out for you?
Hey, it worked pretty well for a while, man.
Yeah. Well, you were pretty knowledgeable, right? Like you would be able to talk to people and convert people. Presumably that doesn't go away. Like you've still got the knowledge, right?
Yeah.
You've still got it inside of you.
That the evangelical Christian.
And again, this is my problem with evangelical Christianity, is that it's building you up, but it's building you up with bullshit and with nonsense. And once that bullshit and nonsense hits the real world, you're going to lose your faith. That's my exact problem with evangelicalism. That's my exact problem with Protestantism. And if you go back to the Reformation and look at what the Reformation was talking about, that's not modern Protestantism, and that's not modern evangelicalism. And I hate to admit that. It pains me to admit that, but Redeemed Zoomer is 100% correct here. The things that people have associated with Christianity, global Christianity, specifically the American version of it, is evangelical, non-denominational, Protestant bullshit. Has nothing to do with the faith. Has nothing to do with Christianity. And honestly, it's usually hateful and very political.
Part of my brain will never go away. Is always there judging the deconstructed Los Angeles YouTuber. You know, I think so. I whenever I see somebody talk about me, and I try not to do that very often. Like, I know just being on your podcast and talking about it, like, we get, you know this game very well. You give you give the material, you provide the material for all the Christian reaction channels.
Oh, sure.
This is what they feed off of, right? This is what they want. If we're talking about this, they want to talk about us talking about it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times,
I feel like that hair has to be implants or a wig.
I'm listening to myself say things, and I'm like, oh, that's what they're going to say about this.
Yeah.
You know, and I try not to calculate that too much and think about, you can drive yourself crazy, like trying to like orchestrate all your words.
Yeah, yeah, but it's something you're always aware of as a
Yeah.
public figure. Was most of the stuff that you were doing, like, was it biblical? Was it arguments for God's existence? Was it like, what kind of approach were you taking? What was
Just
your
make
like,
sure that we got
expertise when it
good
comes to
sound.
evangelism?
So with Campus Crusade for Christ, we would share something called the Four Spiritual Laws. And it was...
Hold on. I'm going to do a little test of sound. Sound test. 1, 2, 1, 2. It's been a while since I've been on. You ready for some echo?
Crazy, like trying to like orchestrate all your words.
Yeah, yeah, but it's something you're always aware of as a public figure. Was most of the stuff that you were doing, like, was it biblical? Was it arguments for God's existence? Was it like, what kind of approach were you taking? What was your like, expertise when it comes to evangelism?
So with Campus Crusade for Christ, we would share something called the Four Spiritual Laws. And it was...
Hold on. I'm going to do a little test of sound. Sound test. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, we're good.
A little booklet, essentially, that Bill Bright, the founder of Campus Crusade, had put together. And it was essentially a gospel tract. You know, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. All people have sinned. And it's basically, it's the gospel, right?
Yeah.
And 4 laws, 4 spiritual laws.
That's not the gospel. Hold on. Let's listen to that again. That's not the gospel.
Crusade had put together. And it was essentially a gospel tract. You know, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. All people have...
So the whole God has a plan for your life part, I'm not sure you can find that in the Bible. People can differ.
sinned. And it's basically, it's the gospel, right?
All people have sinned. Again, that can be a misinterpretation of what original sin actually means. An inclination to sin versus actually sinning. But okay.
And 4 laws, 4 spiritual laws. It was very like 1950s Christianity, you know. But it was very effective because what it did is it
and again, the conflation of Christianity with Protestantism.
You had the ability, and of course I wouldn't like always break out the booklet. I would just, you know, maybe do it in the context of a conversation. But, you know, you might go out on, it sounds crazy when you think about it, but like we would go down to spring break at like Panama City Beach, and you got all these kids just partying on the beach. And we were like, well, we're going to go out on the beach and we're going to start spiritual conversations with people. And we're going to plant seeds in the least. And in the best case scenario, we're going to bring someone to a point of decision. That's what you want to do, bring them to that point of decision, right? So a great question is, you know, if you were to die tonight, how certain are you that you would go to heaven, right? I mean, that's
even if you're a Christian, there's no guarantee you're going to go to heaven. So really, it's a bad question.
great.
It's heavy.
It's heavy, and usually if like you're in the middle of partying in Panama
break.
City Beach and you're like drunk and you're so many students are sort of, you know, day 3, day 4 at spring break, and they've just been pumping themselves full of alcohol, and they're literally some of them are still having a ball, but some of them are like actively realizing that there's no fulfillment in the excesses, right? And they're like, it's like the perfect time to approach
No,
them.
man, it's quite an existential moment, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of interviews with drunk people on the streets, and it can go one of 2 ways. There are like the funny ones when people are vulnerable in the sense that they might say something a bit stupid or whatever, and it makes for a funny viral moment. But also, the Christian outreach. I know people were doing that at my university too, where they used to sort of stand outside the nightclubs, and they weren't actually preaching or evangelizing. They would just hand out like water and biscuits and things. And I suppose it was like it's a Christian route, but it is. I mean, all of the vices sort of come out in a nightclub.
Yeah.
In the party atmosphere, everything.
But I think that's just a good move in general to tell people to be a little bit more intelligent and make better decisions, especially as they're about to make terrible decisions. There's nothing wrong with that. You're a buzzkill. You're not going to gain much popularity doing that. But it's a good thing.
Everything about your inhibitions, and I feel like that is probably the place where Christ enters so many people. Like when people tell their stories about coming to Christianity, it's often that kind of situation, but writ large across their life. It's like I was in the dumps, I had nowhere to turn. And at the end of a night at the club, you're sort of in a sort of microcosm of a moment like that for the day. You know, you're tired, the lights have come on, and everything is suddenly really ugly. I was in Las Vegas. I remember I've been there once, and I showed up at night, and I thought this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. It was glamorous, it was glittering, it was beautiful. And then in the morning, I woke up relatively early because I was on UK time, and the whole thing was like baked in sunlight, and suddenly it all looked really silly. It looked silly and plastic. And my friend said it was a bit like at the end of a nightclub where the lights come on and you realize everything's actually been ugly the whole time, and you just sort of see it, and he's like, that's kind of what Jesus does. You know? He just like turns the light on and shows you that everything was ugly all along, because I mean, Vegas is one of the most demonic places I've ever been to in my life. Even had, right, so I was there with
there's an emptiness there for sure.
I was there with the guy with there's a show called the Iced Coffee Hour, which I was on, and one of the hosts of that, he was sort of driving me down LA, and we went past what's the pyramid one called? You know, the one that's like Egypt. I forget what the place is actually called.
I don't know the name of it.
It's got this huge pyramid that shoots this massive beam of light up into the sky, right? And he said, oh, that's really interesting actually, because, you know, Las Vegas often gets these like swarms of locusts. I was like, really? They get swarms of locusts? He's like, yeah. And you know, the crazy thing is, because this pyramid shoots up that massive beam of light, it's amazing. When it happens, they all like swarm onto
like a tornado
and start going crazy. And I was like, so you're telling me that swarms of locusts descend on Egypt in Sin City?
Yeah.
It was all getting a little bit biblical.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like that is the perfect place to walk up to somebody and be like, do you think there's something more?
Yeah, and it's so interesting, because I think that one of the misconceptions about someone who, like me, was a person of faith, of Christian faith, and is no longer a person of Christian faith, or, you know, I've got some faith in things, but not really religious faith, is that somehow the two alternatives are that life of excess and selfishness and like pleasure, or religious faith in Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I think it can throw people off a lot of times when I'm like, oh, I recognize you know, I don't see it as necessarily like, well, one is right and one is wrong. But it's just like, yeah, clearly like a human that is simply focusing on pleasures like that ultimately end up just being, they become empty pretty quickly. Like that's just a universal truth. That's not, like you as a Christian don't have a universal hold on that truth. That's not just because it was mentioned in the Bible. Does it?
Let's go back and hear that again.
Clearly, like a human that is simply focusing on pleasures like that ultimately end up just being, they become empty pretty quickly. Like that's just a universal truth. That's not, like you as a Christian don't have a universal hold on that truth. That's not just because it was mentioned in the Bible.
Well, I would say first off, that's never mentioned in the Bible. Secondly, that's more Greek philosophy, Aristotelian self-control. I'm looking at my yin yang little symbol here. I'm trying to think if that's even mentioned in Taoism. I don't even think it's even mentioned in Taoism. Maybe Buddhism, but I wouldn't say that. Yeah, that's not a Christian or Catholic or any thing that I can think of. Maybe Baptists who like view wine as evil, but they don't even view it as evil. It's more you're not allowed to celebrate until Jesus returns, because you know he's like, this is the last time I will taste this till I come back. So even though they might apply that principle to drinking now, the initial idea behind it isn't that alcohol is evil. It's that you're abstaining until you're allowed to celebrate. I think he has a misconception of what Christianity teaches. And it's a misconception that's a popular misconception, but a misconception nonetheless.
Does it mean that that's the only place that truth shows up? Like it's a human experience, right? So now as someone who doesn't really know what I think about God, I still recognize like the emptiness of a place like Las Vegas. But I'm also like, you know what? Maybe every once in a while I want to go experience some excess pleasures.
Yeah. Oh, it's fun.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And not judge myself or judge others for it at the same time.
Yeah.
Knowing that if I take the perspective.
Also, not judging oneself because you suddenly don't believe in God, that negates tons of philosophy. There's a lot of philosophies, including Stoicism, that if you let yourself go and just embrace your excesses, you would be condemned and convicted for it. So it's not a religious thing. Might be a wisdom thing or a philosophy thing, but it's not a religious thing. I really think he just, again, I didn't like his show. I don't particularly like him as a person. So I might be a little biased here, but I don't think he understands religion very well. I don't think he understands most things very well. Like I said, I didn't like his hot takes or mild takes back in the day.
Into that, oh, I recognize the emptiness of this. Eating at a buffet. I mean, how many times can you eat at a buffet, right?
Yeah.
Before you're like, okay, get me out of the buffets. But I feel like, again, this is kind of the perspective that
Louis, they're calling you out. He's saying, how can you enjoy Golden Corral so often?
I think about the way that I thought about those students when I was there with the truth in my hand. I was like, there's two paths here. There's the path that you're on, which is just self-sabotage, or there's Jesus.
Well, that's more false dichotomy bullshit. So again, I just don't think he had a strong understanding of Christianity. And what he was preaching was lies, and he eventually realized he was preaching lies. But again, that has nothing to do with Christianity. That has to do with him being deceived and deceiving others.
Never considering that, well, maybe there's a few more ways to think about these things.
Do you think there's pride in there? I mean, one of the worst sins a Christian can commit is the sin of pride. And I think they're constantly sort of battling against it, especially when you're in a position, I mean, let alone some of the people I talk to who have public platforms, constantly putting themselves in front of a microphone and answering people's questions and being constantly praised. It must be really difficult to not get prideful when it starts working. But even in an outreach situation like this, is there an element where it's sort of like, not like I'm better than these people, but like, look at me doing this good thing, walking into the depths of hell and harrowing it and getting everyone, back to Christ?
Yes. I mean, I think that there is, there's an element of sort of taking pride in the work that you're doing for God, even though you can easily give God the credit, be like, the Spirit was working through me. Because if you know the code of humility, and you know how to talk about these things, but secretly, you're thinking about how you're doing in relation to other Christians, and you're thinking about how they're doing in relation to you. Yeah, you can't. It's human nature. You're gonna do that. But I think there's another type of pride that I think back on those times. I remember.
Eric says, you don't get it, man. A lifetime of being a Southern Baptist clearly makes him an expert in the field. Is that what he was? Was he a Southern Baptist? That makes a lot of sense.
Specific instance, and this is actually after I was no longer on staff with Campus Crusade, but I was still very active in the church, and I was leading a Bible study. And we had become friends with this couple that were Catholic. And in my estimation...
Uh-oh. He's going to start peeing on my territory. See what's going on.
Catholics weren't Christians. I mean, I was that type of evangelical.
Whoa, really?
I was like, well, maybe there's some...
So there you go. Me and him weren't on the same page ever. We're not on the same page now, and we weren't on the same page then.
That actually have a relationship with Jesus.
Idolaters.
But they believe, they believe that it's works and faith. It's not just faith alone. Sure. And so they don't have the grace thing figured out. At the very least, I need to introduce them to the real truth, right? And so I knew they were going to be there. And so I was like, well, I'm going to do a Bible study. I'm going to go from Galatians, right? Because Galatians talks about that, basically how it's about faith and and not about works. And it was one of those things that, in retrospect, I was thinking about them, and everyone else in the Bible study, the other regulars, knew that I was kind of preaching to them from this perspective. And I think back on that, and I'm like, I brought a lot of spiritual pride to that situation because I thought I had the correct perspective and just assumed they don't agree with me about this, and they're definitely wrong. I'm bringing them in to give them the truth. When you think that you've got the truth, and it's a truth that impacts everyone, it applies to everyone, it's really difficult.
No. It's not a straw man. He's fighting the straw man. So he's the farmer, maybe? Maybe he's the crow. That's why he has the hair.
To not take pride in that and to begin to see yourself as better. I mean, I'm not saying that all Christians think that they're better than other people. I'm just saying for me...
your experience.
That was a cross-reference.
It's
knowing, I remember lying there when I was in college and thinking how grateful I was that I basically believed the right thing about
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah, well, I often parody
That's a level of arrogance.
Christian denominations with that exact thought. It's like,
Right.
man, what are the odds? How lucky you are.
And with no irony at all.
Yeah.
Of course, I was, a 20-year-old kid, but I was lying there in bed and I was like, man, like, not only am I a Christian, but I am the right kind of Christian. Like, I believe.
I mean, this just sounds like you're headed straight to deconversion from day one. Now, this could be him, just to be clear, memory's faulty. And this could be him projecting back how he feels now about Christianity. So maybe he wasn't really this arrogant as a 20-year-old. But let's assume that his self-perception of himself at 20 is correct. This is exactly the kind of person who would deconvert. This is not a strong sense of faith. There's no humility here. There's no humbleness. There's no charity here. There's no poverty here. And by poverty, I don't mean like not of being able to afford, I don't know, groceries. I mean like the virtue of poverty, the virtue of humility here. So yeah, this is exactly who would deconvert. He has no basis in his faith. His basis is a misinterpretation of words, of ancient words that he has no strong grounding in. I mean, yeah.
The right stuff. I'm in the right denomination. I'm in the right ministry. Like even
And this is again why I preach so hard on my channel how faith is practice. Faith is not blind belief. I get that the Protestant understanding, the Protestant definition is what most people understand about religion. I get it. They even define other non-Christian religions based on the Protestant understanding. I've read so many books by so many scholars that they just decry this problem, and then they immediately fall into the problem when they're defining the subject they're talking about. I get it. It's the dominant perspective in the West. It's the Protestant perspective. But globally, there's a global religion out there. There are people who have been practicing their faith their entire lives for generations. There's millions and billions of people who practice non-Protestant faith, whether it's Christian or Buddhist or Taoist, or Hinduism. And there's different sects and different denominations of Hinduism. So this guy's just an arrogant ass, and he's viewing things through a Protestant lens, even now that he's deconverted and deconstructed. It's annoying. It's very annoying.
The ministries here on campus, I'm in the one that is the most serious about this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm so thankful that I'm right about everything. Essentially is what I was saying.
Yeah, those are my nightly affirmations too.
Again, you need those good old-fashioned traditional Christian virtues of charity, poverty, humility. Without those things, you have no grounding in your faith. You have no practice. Christianity is a practice. Faith is a practice. If you use the Protestant definition of faith, where it's this weird, esoteric, intellectual assent, you have nothing. You're worshiping nothing. You're practicing nothing. You're just going through a habit that means nothing. You have no ritual. You have no principles. You have no virtues to stand by. You're just simply stating, I'm saved. And if you're into once saved, only saved, you even divorce yourself from the good principles that you can get and the good ethics you can get out of Christianity. So now you're just out there, God will take care of it. Great. Good job. Blind faith. Amazing. Not what Christianity is taught, not in the Bible, not anywhere. Not even what Martin Luther taught. Hello, Santiago.
So grateful for being right about everything. It's fascinating. There is an interesting paradox there, the so-called preface paradox, where people can think that they're right about everything whilst also thinking they're wrong about at least one thing. It's called the preface paradox because at the beginning of a book, authors will often say, if there are any mistakes in here, I'm sorry. But they've gone through meticulously and checked every single one. So
Right.
if I went through every single one of your beliefs individually and said, do you think this is true? Yes. Do you think this is true? Yes. Because I'm going through your beliefs. So definitionally, every one of them
Right.
would say yes. But if at the end I then say, but do you think at least one of those beliefs is actually false? if you're a bit humble in any respect, you go, yeah, of course one of them's false.
Yeah.
So you've got this paradox of thinking they're all true, but at least one of them's false. It's got to do with like probabilistic
right.
certainty probably, but yeah, there's that feeling that you've got God on your side as well, and you sort of go to sleep slightly prideful, slightly content, slightly happy.
I think this, as he calls it a paradox, is more highlighted in Calvinism and in other forms of mild Calvinism, which is you have this idea that everyone's wicked and everyone's a sinner and everyone's against God and you're actively fighting against God. But God's on your side. It's like, what are you talking about? I think Calvinism is the worst heresy, and at the same time the closest heresy that's closest to the truth, because they get so much right about the literal interpretation of the Bible. And I didn't used to feel this way about Calvinism. It took me reading through the ESV. I didn't read through all of it, but reading through the ESV study Bible to see how much they get right. And then they just get it, like they get so much right and they get it wrong at the end. They get so much right and they get it wrong at the end. They keep coming to the wrong conclusions, but looking at the correct data sets. And I'm just like, okay, Calvinism, there's something there. There's something there to argue with and argue against. Baptists, for instance, I love their dedication. Like each denomination has their own greatness, their own thing they're great about when it comes to religion. Southern Baptists, their evangelization and their just blind faith is beautiful. Their services are great, like the songs and the singing. Catholicism, we're terrible at that part. Like we don't evangelize, we don't sing, we don't show joy. Like we go to church and we're all quiet. So like, hey, there's some good stuff there. But the problem is the background information they're using with is bad data. They're arguing against vaccines. They're arguing against dinosaurs. They're arguing against women's rights or something like that. Like, it's just like, dude, come on. You gotta, I don't know. It's funny. Not funny, haha.
Where does that certainty come from? Was it the result of Bible study and consideration of different groups and denominations? Was it more sociological, just sort of the way you were brought up? Were you cognizant of the factors which led you?
One of the things I love about Catholicism and even Orthodoxy is that there's no guarantee you're getting to heaven. It's like, no, you can come to Mass every single day. You can do everything that you think that's right. You can be completely wrong. You're still going to go to hell. Like the fact that there's no guarantee that assurance is not a thing in Catholicism is something that I love. Because it's like, no, you could be wrong. You could be understanding what I'm saying incorrect, and what I'm telling you could be wrong too. We just don't know. We don't know the mind of God. I love that admission, and I hate that it doesn't exist in more Protestant denominations. Their arrogance, the level of arrogance that they have is amazing, which is funny because then those same people will then call Catholics and Orthodox arrogant because we believe in an authority structure.
To be in the correct denomination and the correct student group.
Yeah, so not at the time. I think that
Santiago, you're completely correct there. I wouldn't use the word rabbit hole, but you're completely correct. I would say it's a deep well. But yes, Santiago says, to be fair, Catholicism is a rabbit hole. There's not really a bite-sized way to learn all of it. Very true. Same thing with Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is so deep, and I've said this so many times on my channel. If I wasn't Catholic, I would be an Orthodox. The reason why I'm not an Orthodox is because they don't have the Pope. If an Eastern Rite Mass, Eastern Rite Church ever comes down to the Rio Grande Valley, for those that don't know, that's where I'm from, I would just directly, I would stop going to my local parish. I would stop going to the Basilica, and I would, is it the Basilica that I go to, or the shrine? The Basilica. I would stop going to the Basilica, and I would just go to that Eastern Rite Church all the time. I love the Eastern Rite Mass. I love the Orthodox Mass, the John Christensen Mass. It's so beautiful. I love that thing. But anyway, that's what I would do. Just because they acknowledge the Pope and they're within the union, they're within communion with the Catholic faith.
What I would have said is that I had been taught the right stuff from my parents, and I'd been in the right environment growing up. I think that ultimately there's a few factors that contributed to it. I think number one,
Happy Easter, everybody, by the way.
Certainty is a really important aspect of religious faith, and especially
No, see, that's again a misunderstanding. Certainty is a really important aspect, and assurance is a really important aspect to Protestantism. That is, when you read it's not the Augustine Confession, what is it? I literally read it on this channel. It was the counter to the Council of Trent. St. Osberg Confession? The Osberg Confession. Their only concern is assurance. They just keep going back to assurance and assurance. In traditional Christianity, we don't care about assurance. We have faith in God. Faith is practice. We're living out our faith. We're doing penance. We're like making sure, like, oh, we might have messed up. Let's figure it out. We're living out our faith with fear and trembling. We're working out our faith with fear and trembling. Protestantism doesn't have that, and that's one of the problems with Protestantism. Of all stripes of Protestantism, including the non-denominational types and the type that say they're not even truly Protestants. The people who have broken off from Protestantism to continue a new Christianity.
Christianity, and especially evangelical Christianity, because I think that agreeing with a set of propositional statements is actually if you ask somebody to describe, they might say, well, it's about a relationship with Jesus. But if you're like, well, yeah, but what does that mean?
Again, these are Protestant talking points that mean nothing. If you watch my video against Gavin Ortlund, the last one that I made, I highlight that point exactly. These dogmatic statements, these acronyms mean nothing. They're not from the Bible. They're not from Christ. They're just sayings people have made up to fight Catholicism. Catholicism is not the only standard to ancient traditional Christianity. There's Coptic, there's Orthodoxy, there's even Russian Orthodoxy, which is a newer thing, but still subscribes to ancient traditional Christianity. The fact that Cliff Kaninsky keeps calling himself an Orthodox Christian is annoying to no end. Orthodox Christianity is Eastern Orthodox. So unless you're a Greek Orthodox or some other Romanian style, I don't know, Jerusalem Orthodox Christian of some type, I don't know, Alexandrian style Christian, you're not Orthodox Christian, Cliff. You're a Protestant. You're an evangelical.
These propositional statements come up. It's like, well, I believe this about Jesus. If any church worth its salt has a "we believe" place on their website, right? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought, right? And so I think that being certain and being right about these things comes at a premium. It is really, really important. So I thought that being certain.
If you watch Jimmy Akin's last two videos that he put on his channel, he's like, certainty doesn't matter at all. Like, he's like, look, if the teenage kid comes into church and he doesn't want to be there and he's not really sure, as long as he's receiving the sacraments, he's fine. You got to understand, the rest of the world, the majority of Christians don't think the way that this guy thought when he was a Christian or so-called Christian.
Was very important. And then I just think I had the type of personality, came from the type of family where we kind of thought we had it figured out, right? Like this is a big problem for me now
Well, I would say he's already saying it, but I think you already have that problem. You're rich and famous and you came from a family that was pushing you towards success. So yeah, you think you're right. That's the arrogance of success.
to not settle on what I think I figured out, to be really doubtful of my particular perception of the world, to say, well, I know that I'm wrong about some stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm not sure about, but I can struggle with wanting to latch on to certain ideas and be, well, I've got this figured out, you start trying to build this worldview. So I think it's a combination of the environment, where certainty was really important, and then my personality, the way that I gravitated towards that.
We'll get back to Rhett in just a moment, but first, do you trust the news? I don't, and a lot of that has got...
Okay, we're going to skip his advertisement. Give me about a minute. We're going to take a minute break. I'm going to stretch my legs, get some water, and then we'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Let's keep going. I've seen what's along.
Got to do with the bias that inevitably seeps into media reporting. We can never get rid of media bias, but wouldn't it be great if there were a way for us as consumers of news to navigate media bias, objectively comparing the way that different sources are reporting on the same story?
As we were talking about that, I said, okay, well, all right. If I want to believe the Bible, and again, of course, I bought into univocality, and I was. So I remember sitting on the porch one time with my friends as we were talking about that.
Okay, he's definitely listened to Dan McCullough, and he's using the term univocality.
I said, okay, well, all right. If I want to believe the Bible, and again, of course, I bought into univocality, and I was able to reinterpret the passages that would question this perspective in light of the ones that I had gravitated towards, which is how you build, a systematic theology to begin with. But I remember sitting with them and saying, okay, I can agree that God preordained a certain number of people to be His children, which definitely means that a certain number of people are not predestined to be His children. In fact, statistically speaking, the majority of people who've ever lived and live right now, and they're going to be in hell. So
the default is hell. So then you got to talk about what hell is.
believe that because the Bible says it. But, and I paused because I was a little bit nervous. I was like, but doesn't that kind of make God an asshole? And they were like, no. He's just you can't understand.
So he's reversing the way that it works. So everyone was going to Sheol. Everyone was dying. Nothing was moving forward beyond that. You were going to non-existence. Then God comes along, Jesus, and Jesus is the lifeline. Now, there are different ways to interpret that. There are those who think that Jesus then went back in time as well, and everyone, whoever was good, goes up to heaven. Then there's universalists and non-universalists who are hopeful. That's what they call them, hopeful. Is that either hell is empty or virtually empty. So only the devil and maybe Judas are in there. And then there's another way to understand it, which is that only the true believers get to heaven. And then there's Jehovah's Witness types who think there's an exact number of people who get to be saved, and that's it. Truth is, we don't know. Heaven is not promised in the way that people think it is. Heaven is... So when we talk about heaven, we're actually talking about the new kingdom. And heaven, as it's understood in the Old Testament, is not what's being promised. And for some people, they think that it actually is heaven on earth, which doesn't really work with the fact that one day the earth will blank out and cease to exist. But whatever. The more materialist out there will think that it's talking about a new earth, meaning actual this earth, heaven on this earth, or a new earth that's everybody is now re-embodied and has glorified bodies, or a new body in a new heaven or a new kingdom. Depends on what translation you're using, all that kind of stuff. I'd be interested to know what the Hebrew is on that. I don't. So I'm going to stop there.
First of all, we all deserve to be in hell. The fact that he would save, he's justified in not saving anyone.
Yeah, that's the line, isn't it?
And so then I was like,
Well, it's not deserve or not deserve. It's not based on deserving anything. It's grace. And so again, Jesus is the lifeline. And whether or not he went back in time and saved everybody, saved only the chosen, who knows? But that's kind of irrelevant to living out the Christian ethos, which is, again, something I hit on the video I did responding. I don't know how you want to put it. Countering Gavin Ortland.
yeah, but he decided to create a world in which these beings would exist. Like, he still made that choice. Doesn't that still kind of make him an asshole? So I was having thoughts like that.
So again, all animals cease to exist under most people's interpretations. So that would be the same case with most people. They just die the true death, which is what hell is supposed to be, dying the true death. So you get resurrected. You then, if you get sent into the abyss, you cease to exist. You get burnt up to nothingness. There's nothing left. This goes back to a different understanding of a different type of hell it's a Jewish understanding where hell is actually really short, like 2 weeks. And basically people go there and they burn off all their sins and they go straight up to heaven. And if you mess up in heaven, you go back to hell, get repurified. But eventually, if you get repurified too much, there's nothing left. And so what's not left is discarded. This gets a little in the weeds into Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. But yeah. Continuing on.
At like
Right.
20 years old, but was able to continue to carry like a cognitive dissonance that allowed me to still be a very strong Christian and just be like, okay, there are things that I don't understand. God's got that figured out. That'll be the first question I ask him when I get to heaven.
Yeah, and of course, there's no Christian who doesn't have thoughts like that swimming around in their minds too.
No, I've never been concerned with that. Then again, I've lived a much tougher life than probably these two guys have.
For some people, those are questions that they just retain, and like you say, think, I'll ask God when I see him. For others, it's like the first domino falling apart. I'm interested in what your view of hell was at the time when you said that most people are probably going to hell. What did you think hell was at the time when you were around 20?
I had talked myself into, mostly as a result of that struggle I was having, that it was probably some sort of, I basically became, without really reading too much about it, an annihilationist.
Annihilationism. Which is fine. But then he's going to have to figure out what the gnashing of teeth is.
Yeah.
And so just the idea that people who don't know God, who are not his children, will
To be very clear, the Bible never does explain what hell actually is.
probably go through some sort of torment, but it won't be forever, and then they will cease to exist.
Yeah.
Never-ending, ceasing, constant torment. Ain't that fun?
Yeah, and that hell is...
Whether or not it's a perception of unceasing torment, because that's the last thought you ever had, or you're just going to be in hell. Who knows?
I mean, annihilationism is the view that people will be annihilated if they don't go to heaven. They sort of cease to exist.
And again, that annihilation is supported by the Bible, but all matter cannot be completely destroyed. So there are problems with annihilationism, not just in the theological sense, but also in the metaphysical sense.
Maybe after a period of suffering of some sort. I've always been quite attracted to that idea because of the like classical Thomistic arguments for the existence of God, which have God as like the ground of being. Mm-hmm. If God is the foundation of being itself and everything that is participates...
I doubt this guy has read those, but who knows? Maybe he has.
...in him, then if hell is something like separation from God, and if God is the ground of all being, then what does it mean to not be with God? It means to not be, to not exist.
Yeah,
Right. So I've always thought philosophically there's good grounding for considering separation with God to be the same thing as not existing. Because to exist is to participate in God's existence, as some of the classical philosophers would put it.
Yeah.
But that's not as motivational as the fire and brimstone
Yeah.
imagery. And presumably in your outreach you wouldn't push too heavy on the hell stuff, especially considering that you thought most people were going there anyway and there's nothing...
Yeah, right. And I think that it's interesting to see. I'm still a fan of Christian apologetics. It's fascinating to me to see the way that, and especially now, there wasn't nearly as much just apologetics media as there is now when I was deconstructing, because this mostly happened to me in the late aughts and, 2010, 2011. And nobody was making...
Yes. So just short answer to that is most modern Christians base their understanding on hell, if not media, on books, on medieval books like Paradise Lost and Dante and other poetry like that, medieval poetry. But all of that is based off of Greek myth, and it's kind of a bastardization of Greek myth, combining it with Jewish and Christian ideas. And so that little mixture is how we get an understanding of hell. But it's a combination of Tartarus and Hades, which were not even the same place. And it adds some other ideas from other cultures. Surprisingly, Norse mythology gets in there. I've seen in more modern literature a lot of Chinese understanding of hell and Buddhist understanding of hell get thrown in there. So hell just becomes like a mishmash of different of different ideas. Who knows? Again, the Bible's pretty silent on the issue. And again, the word hell is a incredibly terrible mistranslation of what the Bible is describing.
There were people writing books, but nobody's making internet content about this stuff.
And
but I kind of
when I say a terrible mistranslation, I don't mean it as an original term. Whenever, Jerome, whenever he chose the word hell, it probably was closer to what people mean by the word hell in the Bible, with the Aramaic and Jewish and Hebrew and Koine Greek writers meant. But what the word hell has come to mean is completely different from what he meant. So, yeah.
Dip in and dip out, and to see the way
Or
the
what he was
conversation around
referencing.
hell is evolving is fascinating, because it is a really, it's like if you've got if you're selling a product, it's like the one thing where we get all the bad reviews about this. It's like, oh shit, people keep talking about this one thing, and it's the hell thing. So how do we rebrand hell? And
You don't need to rebrand hell. It's there as a warning, and if you believe the Bible, it's true.
the way that hell is being rebranded is smart. You know, a lot of people are moving into this, annihilationism, but also
Again, it's not a rebranding. These are ideas that are there from the beginning of Christianity. For it to be a rebranding, it would have to be people changing what it means. But if you go back to Origen and go back to Tertullian, there is an idea of annihilationism going even from there. And if you go back to the rabbinical fathers, which is actually later, but they're supposedly connecting it to ancient Jewish ideas. Annihilationism is an idea even there. And again, dying to true death, or the second death, that's a biblical idea. So again, not a rebranding. So again, this guy doesn't know shit and doesn't know what he's talking about.
there are people who just frame it as separation from God. It's just simply like you rejected God's love. Like that's not hateful for him to say, well, you just are going to be on your own and whatever that is to deal with your own stuff. And it sounds a lot nicer. It just sounds like you're just rejecting something. And I think that's become a pretty.
Well, that's the Catholic talking point. But okay, call it repackaging, even though we're the older faith and the older tradition.
big talking point.
Yeah. What? I mean, maybe this was one of them, but when do the dominoes start to fall over for you? How old are you, and what starts to happen? Because right now you're speaking past tense. So at some point you go from not just Christian, but really involved professional Christian, as you put it, to now where you are. Where does this start?
So in my early 20s, the first couple years out of school, I'm an engineer, civil engineer. I'm still very involved in Campus Crusade at the time. I'm not having that many, existential questions about it. If anything, I'm thinking about how I'm moving towards being a professional Christian, because my wife was still in college at the time. And so Link and I had kind of, we'd been best friends since first grade, 1984. So we kind of knew what we were working towards.
I didn't believe the Bible until my 30s. I believed the principles of the Bible, the morality of the Bible. The first time I read it when I was 15, and again, I didn't get past the giants and the people living for thousands of years, but the first time I read it, I think I at least got through Deuteronomy, and it was the first time that I ever thought about morality and rules. So I do think that... what's a professional Christian? It's someone who makes money off of Christianity. I'll get into that in a second. But for me, when I tried to read the Bible at 15, outside of the idea of like, oh, certain things that I was doing are probably wrong, and so I should stop doing those things. And understand that is a profound effect on someone. Outside of that, I didn't believe the stories in the Bible, the narratives. I couldn't believe them. So while I did believe, or I did consent or submit to the rules in there, not believing in magic. It was the first time I heard that magic wasn't real was when I read the Bible. When I first heard that fate and destiny are not Christian ideas only predestination is, and all these other things. The first thing that shook me from my superstition and shook me from my self-righteousness was reading the Bible. That is very, very true. But the narratives, I didn't come to believe the narratives until I was, like I said, maybe 33. And it's only after I had read some stuff by John Paul II and I think another pope, maybe Pope Pius, where they were talking about how don't ask me why I was reading papal encyclicals and not the Bible. Let's not worry about that. But it was in reading their interpretation of the Bible and having them explain that it's polemic and having them explain that these stories are actually referencing ancient pagan myths and Mesopotamian myths. Having a pope explain that made me, when I went back to the Bible, accept a lot more of what I was reading. So that was super powerful for me. Hence, I can't be part of a denomination or faith that doesn't have a pope, because the pope's writings themselves were instrumental in me coming to Christianity. And so was Catholic Answers, although I've come to move away from Catholic Answers very much because of their apologetical issues and proselytizing issues, not because of disagreements in their theology. Their theology is solid. But let's get back to what it means to be a professional Christian. So there are 2 houses near my neighborhood that are huge, that have been huge long before. There's celebrities and famous people who have been moving to my town, and it sucks because there's now 3-story, 3-acre houses all around my neighborhood. But back in the day, the 2 biggest houses in the city that I live in were both owned by pastors. One of them ran a place called Faith Grace Church or something like that, and the other one did something else. And the third biggest house was actually ended up being a friend of mine who his father was a very successful doctor down here. But those were the 3 biggest houses, period. Eventually, another person who ended up becoming a friend of mine, they were billionaires from Mexico City, moved over here, and they built like a compound that they've now torn down. I guess they sold the land, and they're now building neighborhoods there, which is kind of a disappointment. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in person outside of like this mansion, human construction wise, outside of this mansion in California. I think it was the Hertz Mansion or something like that. Anyway, so the 2 biggest houses in the area where I live in, which the area that I live in is like extreme poverty, were pastors. And so when me and my wife were walking, I guess this was after we had gotten married, I think. I'm not sure anymore. When we were walking through the neighborhoods, she saw this house and she's like, oh, this person must, do this and that. I'm like, no, this person's a pastor. And it was a cul-de-sac, and the entire cul-de-sac, which must have been 3 lots, was one house. And she was like, who lives there? And I'm like, a pastor. She's like, you can make money off religion? Because all she had seen is me doing Catholicism. And I'm like, yeah, you can make a ton of money off of Christianity. She's like, well, why don't you do that? You know all this stuff. And I'm like, because I don't want to be that kind of person. I think that's really gross and disgusting what that person's doing. So that's a professional Christian. It's not just being a pastor or an apologist. It's someone who's using Christianity to make money and make a living. And I think that's really gross. I think what Ruslan does is completely disgusting, honestly.
And the idea that we were going to develop this ministry where we
and
got
yes, that is my problem with Counter Bertuzzi outside of just the grifting.
be funny and make our comedy videos, and we were really trying to find a way to do the thing.
And that is what led me away from EWTN. Not EWTN, I love EWTN. That led me away from Catholic Answers. Is their constant fundraising, and when their fundraising was no longer about paying the bills, but about being profitable. Yeah, I that turned me off.
That we loved for the cause that we loved.
So it sort of started as with God in the periphery here, of like with all the video stuff, and it's all sort of directed towards at least subtly to some degree, evangelism.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was a way to have my cake and eat it too, because I really wanted, like, we are entertainers at heart. We wanted to be filmmakers. We wanted to make things that, had.
I think we're going to go 30 more minutes, and then I'm going to finish my workout from earlier today. And also, I got to look for some paperwork that I having trouble finding. So I think we're going to go 30 more minutes, guys.
And significance culturally. We wanted to do that from the very beginning. So we always had our minds of like on this idea that maybe we'll kind of, we can use this ministry, or we can have a ministry where we're doing these things that we love, and then maybe something that we make will be impactful enough so that we could one day, maybe we'll move to Hollywood and maybe we'll have a ministry there just through the things that we create. That was sort of the thought.
Do you see that? Move to Hollywood, ministry as prophet here. It's just gross to me. It's just absolutely disgusting.
In the early days. So shortly after the engineering stint, go on staff with Campus Crusade. At that point, you're going to the staff training and you're taking the seminary classes and your initial, and I was always I was not like a super deep student of theology, but I would say moderately deep. And there were certain ideas that I would gravitate towards and things that I like to think about and talk about. At that same time, I was given a book, and I never really thought about the intersection of science and faith. I think the way that I would have described it is, I think that most scientists are not Christians. Most scientists are atheists, and they've come up with...
I wonder if he thought Catholics were atheists.
Some pretty wacky ideas to try to explain the world and why people are the way that they are, why the world is the way that...
Protestants, evangelicals, and apologists, please listen to this part right here. This is the problem with your framing. This is the problem with your understanding of the world. And this is a problem with your evangelization and your proselytizing. By lying to people, you're setting them up to lose their faith. By denying evolution, you're setting people up to lose their faith. By denying medicine, by denying vaccines, by denying blood transfusions, you're setting up people to lose their faith. If you're denying evolution, if you're denying science, if you're denying physics, you're setting up people to lose their faith. Please understand that.
That it is, and they're mostly just desperate attempts to explain the world without God's involvement. So that whole thing about evolution and how long the world has been here, that's probably all BS. But I didn't think about it any more deeply than that. I wasn't like a staunch young earth creationist. I didn't think about that issue in particular. Sure. But I picked up...
Please, if you're an apologist and you're watching this, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, I know I get a boost on views at around 10:30 a.m. If you're watching this, listen to this part. This is why people leave the faith. Exactly here. This is the lies that you're telling that lead people to deconversion. I'm not talking about deconstruction. Deconstruction is fine. Deconstruction is a good thing. You should deconstruct every 3 to 5 years. Whenever you get a large amount of new data, you should go back and reassess what you believe and rebuild up from there. Reconstruction is just as important as deconstruction. I want to be very clear. You can't just do one because then you're just left in the dirt. You just go back to the beginning all the time. But aside from new growth, aside from new life, listen to what this guy's saying. This is exactly where you fail as a Protestant evangelical apologist. This is why people are leaving your church in droves. I understand. Trent Horn just made a mea culpa where he was like, well, Catholicism is not doing as well as we are making it seem. And the Protestants, who gives a shit? Who cares? That's not the point. You have to stop lying to people. Catholic apologists need to stop lying to Protestants that Catholicism is Protestantism as it should have been. That it's the better version of Protestantism because it's the real faith. It's not the better version of Protestantism. Catholicism is not Protestantism in any kind of way. 2, Protestants need to stop lying to their own believers and denying things like evolution. Like it's got to stop.
A book from an astronomer, Hugh Ross, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before. And he has a Christian ministry that is like very anti-evolution, but very pro old universe from the standpoint of astronomy, which obviously when you look at all the astronomical evidence and the speed of light and the size of the universe and all this stuff,
Yeah.
okay, the universe has been around for probably as long as the scientists are saying. But then he went on to essentially say that, but all truth is God's truth. And
Correct.
this is totally
Again, that's a Catholic argument.
compatible with the Bible. But just so you know, evolution didn't happen. He was a proponent of something called progressive creationism, which essentially was, yes, the world has been around for as long as the scientists say.
Right.
And these fossils we find are legit.
There's nothing wrong with the idea of progressive creationism because God's still creating today. That being said, evolution's real.
Legitimate fossils that are approximately the date that they're saying they are. But God was creating new batches of creatures, special creations at different stages throughout the history of the world.
Whoa.
And then ultimately resulting in the creation of people.
So, why?
Great question. Great question. So I remember thinking,
Not a great question, but interesting.
I'm reading this, I'm like, it's the first time I ever thought about there being some reconciliation between what we observe in science and my belief about the world. And I just remember
but your belief is wrong. It doesn't matter if you're reconciling truth with a lie. You're still in a lie. We don't know. When it comes to God, the answer is we don't know. God is not a God of the gaps. There's anything that's in creation, anything that's material, we can know and we will know eventually. God is not material. God is not a created being. God is outside creation. We cannot know. There is no way to know. Outside of revelation, there is no way to know anything about God. You need revelation. The arrogance of Protestantism is insane.
thinking, this doesn't feel like a good explanation.
I've never heard of somebody. I mean, I'm sure I've met someone who probably like believes that the Earth is old and the universe is old, but maybe is suspicious of evolution. But specifically, like, well, I'm a scientist and I'm an astronomer, and there's just no way I can look at the redshifting of the galaxies and deny that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. But that evolution stuff from that other field of biology that I probably never really seriously studied, yeah, no, that's all BS. And instead, I mean, God is just creating animals willy-nilly.
And there's animals that are getting more and more like a person before the people.
Yeah, it's like God is just sort of doing little trial runs or
Right.
something.
I mean, what does that say about God is what I was thinking.
Yeah, it gets there eventually. That is
But
a little
again, that's not completely off base, because you have evolution, you have these human-like ancestors before Homo sapiens sapien. You have Cro-Magnon, which might still be part of our Neanderthal might be part of our DNA still. But I mean, you have active DNA, I should say. You have these proto-humans existing. So I don't think that this guy was completely off base, even if he was wrong about evolution. He wasn't completely off base.
a little bit strange. I suppose it's kind of biblical in the sense of like stretching out the story of Genesis over however long you needed, and animals sort of popping in on different days.
The problem is that he's trying to take Genesis literal. That's the problem.
And stuff like this, but yeah, I mean the biggest problem for me that evolution poses to the Christian, and a lot of Christians today just accept evolution. They're like, yeah, sure, humans all have a common ancestor with other animals. The biggest problem that I think it poses is the seeming like arbitrariness with which you have to say that, presuming that our apish ancestors don't get to inherit eternal life. At some point, a mother gives birth to a child, and the child is morally condemnable to hell, but also potentially has the ability to inherit eternal life, but his mother doesn't.
Right.
And
Well, again, it would take consciousness, because what we're arguing is that the soul consciousness is what survives death, something of an identity. And that identity again gets subsumed into Christ, into God. So there's I want to say a philosophical misunderstanding or a philosophical gap between what Alex is saying and what Brett is saying. Rhett, I don't know, whatever. Guy with long hair. I think there's a gap there in their conversation. I think Alex's point is more interesting than what long-haired dude is saying.
And what the difference is there. And maybe it's just a brute fact. Maybe God just breathed life into that particular organism, but it just seems a bit arbitrary and unfair.
Yep.
That person's suffering
Life is unfair. If you're looking for fairness, you're in the wrong reality.
will now be redeemed, and it now means something. But their mothers, who is the same organism, same suffering, same lifestyle, same everything, dies like an animal. It just doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah.
Unless
Well, no, they would still be an animal. And even humans still have animal traits. We're still the human animal. But yeah, it would have been purely animal.
you want to say that personhood is something which develops as well, but that gets you into a whole lot of
Yeah.
trouble with
And
it.
so that's where I ended up going.
I think Alex would benefit from reading some Essence and Energies discussions and the development of the soul as understood by Eastern Orthodox mystics.
Right? Because
Yeah.
when I didn't really buy into the progressive creationism thing, but I was so sure that evolution didn't happen. I was like, when you're raised in the Christian faith, and the only exposure to the idea of evolution you've ever had has come.
Again, Christianity globally, in the largest portion of Christians are Orthodox and Catholics. Your small, tiny understanding of Christianity is not how the majority of Christians throughout history, throughout time, thought. Gregory the First. I don't know what that reference is to. I like Gregory the First. Can you explain that a little bit? Oh, Gregory of Palmas. Yes.
Come through the filter of a Christian scientist telling you why it's not.
I'm assuming you're calling me Gregory of Palmas Stan. I'm assuming that's me and not Rhett, who apparently has no literacy in Christian philosophy or theology.
Not legitimate. You know, somebody comes into your church and they're like the evolution expert, and they're like, they make it seem so impossible that you walk out of that with a full affirmation of the idea that evolution definitely didn't happen, and it's a horrible explanation. It will be debunked
Again, this is the problem with Protestantism.
by the scientists themselves within our lifetime. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we told ourselves, right?
Right.
And we firmly believed it. But because of this proposal, this progressive creationist idea, because the age of the universe and the age of the earth, from a geological, I've always been interested in geology, but from a geological standpoint, I was like, oh, well, this is inescapable. Like, this isn't, like, the way that Answers in Genesis has framed this issue is, I mean,
Well, if you're going to Answers in Genesis, I got to tell you, you might not be as intelligent as you thought you were.
not going to say it's definitely disingenuous. I think they really just believe that it has to, you know, be consistent with the Bible, and so they're just willing to just completely reshape
15 more minutes.
everything that they're seeing in light of that. But I essentially was like, well, this doesn't make any sense. So then the idea of considering evolution, which just felt, I was like, am I actually about to do this? And I was like, well, I think C.S. Lewis believed in evolution. You know, you start saying these things like, yeah, but there's a lot of Christians who are like theistic evolutionists. And okay, so maybe there's something to this. So I read Francis Collins' book, The Language of God. And the thing that I took away from that book was that, well, evolution happened as well. And you know, he touches on it a little bit. He talks about, in that book, I think he talks about the second chromosome, the fusing of the second chromosome. I think he talks a little bit about retroviruses, and essentially, you know, we've got the marks of the same retroviruses on our DNA that chimpanzees do. And there are just these.
Or the Old Testament, specifically Genesis, are doing, not just the Old Testament, the whole Bible, but let me start that again. Or the Bible, specifically, or the Bible, including the Old Testament, specifically here, Genesis, there we go, I said it right, is doing literary tricks and literary tropes and what we might now call counter-apologetics or polemics, but is more easily identifiable, was making an argument against the common beliefs of the day. And those common beliefs were the best explanations at that time. So to their best understanding, this is how things were, and these are the counter arguments to those understandings. And maybe it's not a science book in any kind of way. It's literature. Maybe. Maybe.
Again, there's no other way to see it.
Just like inexplicable data.
Right. It's like if God, if we're not related to every other animal on Earth, well, God certainly tried to make it seem like we are.
Yeah.
And so then that was a huge moment for me. I remember coming home, still living in North Carolina. Again, a lot of people think that the story that is often told is that Link and I were Christians. We came to Los Angeles. We were corrupted by this sinful city, and we threw away our faith. And the reality, and I've told it many times, but you know, it's passed over, is that all this happened when I was in North Carolina.
Right.
This happened when I was completely buckled into the Bible Belt as tightly as you can be, surrounded by people.
Yes, because atheists don't exist in Christian communities? What point are you trying to make here? Obviously, in the rest of the country and the rest of the world, just where there's religious people, there's also atheists. Might be a minority viewpoint, might be a minority understanding. It doesn't mean you don't exist. This is a stupid point. These have been nothing but stupid points from the beginning. Again, I didn't like this show. I don't like his show. His show is nothing but stupid points.
Who agree with me about all these things, with no social pressure to deviate from that at all. In fact, a lot of social pressure to stay
To do
in
the
fold.
opposite.
So I was struggling a lot. Because I didn't have anybody to talk to about this.
Yeah.
I remember talking to Link. I talked to Link about it a little bit, and he would just kind of be like, "Oh, shit!" Like it felt like you're learning a lot of things that seem problematic, but I'm not gonna think. I don't want to think about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jessie, my wife, who did come from like a young Earth creationist background, like that's
Again, problematic. That's if you start off with a lie, no matter how much truth you get, you're gonna eventually just reject everything. You're building cynics. You're building skeptics. It's like the old DARE program when you would say that, oh, one puff of marijuana will destroy your life. And then someone takes a puff of marijuana and they're like, I'm fine. Or the IBS. Or the people who are like, oh, one drink of alcohol will destroy your life. And then they have a drink of alcohol and they're like, I'm fine. You're building an alcoholic. You're building a drug addict. By lying to them about the consequences of their actions or their belief, you're setting up someone to never believe anything you've ever told them, including the true parts. You're just completely destroying your credibility and the credibility of anyone who agrees with you. If you tell someone that sex always leads to STDs, well, then, yeah, you're going to create someone who's super promiscuous once they have sex for the first time and no bad consequence happens. Then once they're 20 bodies, 30 bodies in, they're not going to give a shit. So now you can start telling them, hey, I get it. You're very promiscuous, but you should probably wear a condom. They don't care about what you have to say now. You've lost the plot. You've lost your control of them. You've lost your credibility. You got nothing. Telling someone evolution's not true, telling someone that evolution is going to be debunked, telling someone that the world's only 6,000 years old, you're done. You're done. You've destroyed this person's faith 10 years, 20 years, 15 years, 50 years down the line.
It's what she was taught growing up. When I came home and I was like, we need to talk about something, and I said, I am thoroughly convinced that evolution is true and that we are related to every other animal. I believe in common.
Evolution is true.
human ancestry. And I just think that it is not
Or at
just,
least evolution is correct. If you don't want to use truth because of capital T, lowercase t things. You don't want to be in philosophical land. Evolution is correct. It's the correct answer.
I sort of think it's true. It's just like my reading has led me to think that if this isn't true, then I actually can't determine what anything that's true. It's so overwhelming. Because I'd read additionally to that, Sheeta starts crying. Because this represented, she knew what this represented.
Right.
This was this seismic shift. And I think a lot of people that I tell this story to are like, what do you mean? But there's all these Christians that believe in evolution. Like, I can't believe that this was so significant for you. But I think the reason it was is because at that point, I realized how wrong I could be about something so fundamental.
Yeah.
And I never...
And again, this goes back to why I love Catholicism and I love Orthodoxy. Not what you just said, BS, but what Rhett, I don't like saying that name, what he just said. In Catholicism and in Orthodoxy, the open conceit is we could be wrong about everything. You're probably still going to go to hell. Even if you do all the ceremonies and everything else, you're probably still going to go to hell. But there's a chance you're going to go to heaven. So here's what you got to do to get to heaven. Here's what you got to avoid to get to heaven. But if we're wrong, oops. The conceit of we don't know if we're going to heaven or not is such a great conceit. The lack of assurance, the lack of confidence, the humility, the charity, the poverty, the classic Catholic virtues are so great because you have to live out faith as a practice. Without that, without the Orthodox, without the Orthodoxy, without the Catholic, universal Catholic umbrella, without the Orthodox umbrella, without the Coptic umbrella, without the, I mean, it's called Oriental Christianity, but without the Oriental umbrella, you're just lying to yourself. And it's such a bad take. You go back and you read the Reformers. Go back and read what John Calvin, what Martin Luther and what the other Reformers are arguing for. They're not arguing for this. They're not arguing for where Rhett got to. The fact that the Catholic Church in the earliest recitations, or I say refutations, I should say, of Protestantism were like, this is what it's going to lead to. They were right. This is what it leads to. It leads to this insane, inane understanding of reality that has nothing to do with ultimate reality, has nothing to do with truth. It's just affirming your own beliefs over and over and over again. No doubt, 100% insurance, 100% salvation. Once saved, only saved. You have to do nothing to help yourself. And if you try to help yourself, you're now saying you don't need God. So now you're condemning yourself. So don't do anything to improve your life. Like, understand the problem with this. This is why Protestantism is so bad. This is why I used to shit on Protestantism until I finally heard Gavin Ortlund. Even Matt Whitman, who I love, I still disagree with almost everything that he said. It was Gavin Ortlund was the first Protestant to make sense. And then you read Gavin Ortlund's argument for Protestantism and you're like, this is like no better. Maybe 1 degree better. The conclusions that he's getting to, Gavin, don't stem from Protestantism. He's coming to correct conclusions using the wrong data set, while other Protestants are coming to the wrong conclusions using the correct data set.
Ever considered that I might be wrong about something so fundamental. And then, not only was I wrong, but all of these Christian apologists.
For those who don't understand what I was talking about there, penance is part of reconciliation, so is confession. The whole admittance of penance is that we could be getting it wrong. So you do penance so that way you pay off the temporal consequences of your sins. So you do things to make the world a better place after you confess what you did wrong. And part of penance is correcting the mistake that you made. So you did something wrong, you now need to make it right. But it cannot be done half-heartedly. You have to truly have intent behind it. So if you do the right thing for the wrong reasons, you're still not technically forgiven. It has to be done for the correct motivations. But the work is still efficacious if it's good works. If it's bad works, then it's not efficacious at all. This is really simple stuff. Intention matters. Actions matter. Consequences matter. And Protestantism divorces Christianity from all of that. And again, not original Protestantism. Like you go back to the Reformers, they're not this stupid. I don't know what happens in America with the Puritans, where it just turns into this mess of heresies that deny reality. Like I don't understand how the Puritans leave England, come to America, become evangelicals, and just screw it. Consequences no longer exist.
Who were so sure about their critiques of evolution. They had missed the boat so significantly on this that suddenly I was like, can I trust anything else they've got to say about this? So that was the first big domino.
Yeah. It's significant. Like you say, I mean, you might think, well, there are Christians who believe in evolution, but it depends which way you come at it. I mean, if you're somebody who's like a scientifically minded person who comes to faith in Jesus, you're not going to abandon evolution, but you might think, okay, I can make this all work. But if you've come from the background you've come from, it's like going up to your wife and saying, I just think maybe we should like live in separate houses or something. And your wife starts bawling, and someone says, "Hey, I don't really know. Some people do that. Some married couples, they live apart." So it's like, yeah, but what it represents to move from where we are now and the way we were living to having this kind of question or this kind of desire indicates a direction of thought.
Yeah,
which you don't really want to entertain. Your wife, if I'm not mistaken, was a student of Bart Ehrman. At Chapel Hill.
She was.
Right? And was this around this kind of time? Was she already being fed the atheist lies through her professor?
So when this was undergrad, at UNC. And she, at that point, this was before we even went on staff with Campus Crusade. I mean, there was no questioning of anything. Like we both saw Bart as the enemy, right? This guy is coming and he's just decimating the faith.
Okay.
The Christian students.
Yeah.
And
with a laugh,
Yeah.
He comes in with that chuckle. That
so disarming. And
it's
funny. I haven't met Bart.
We'll go to here
because I want to be able to tell him this story. Well, the first thing that would happen is Jessie. My wife is she's very passionate and she's very smart, and so she was a great defender of the faith when she was in it, and she would challenge him, right? And she would go up to him after class and be like, "What about this or what about that?" And then she would come and report back, this is what he said, and and I'm sure that there are many students who have continued to attempt this strategy with him over the years. At the same time, there was somebody who was working with Campus Crusade at UNC who approached a couple years later when Link and I were already beginning to do our ministry work, who approached me and Link and said, we actually want to create some resources to counter what Bart is doing on campus, because we feel like we need to equip students better because they're going into these classes of his and having being confronted with these questions. And what can we do, in terms of a multimedia project, to address that? So,
and I said this years ago. Most of what Bart Ehrman presents, if you simply read the Church Fathers, it's there from the beginning. It's not new material. This shouldn't shock you. If the first Christians are already agreeing with what Bart is saying, maybe your understanding of Christianity without tradition is the problem.
We were actually beginning to have those conversations. It never became anything. I mean, how ironic would it be if I could dig up a video of me criticizing Bart from 20 years ago? I kind of wish we had done it, cool. Just so I'd have it now.
That would be awesome.
But yeah, so there was never. I think that there.
And to be fair, I think BS actually made this point to me one time when we were talking about where I'm coming from a place where I believed in God, but I didn't believe in the Bible. And then I slowly accepted the Bible, figuring out how to reconcile certain, let's call them idiosyncrasies. I don't have a problem when I look at scientific data and look at the Bible, because I'm looking at two different things. If you're someone who's come from it, again, as BS pointed out, where all of this had to be true, and it had to be true in a way that's material and literal and non-metaphysical, it becomes truly problematic. And then you add into it all this other fiction that's not related to the Bible that you've now attached your belief to, which is like, okay, well, the Bible's teaching hell as understood by Dante. Why you choose a Catholic if you're a Protestant, I don't know. But apparently that what happened in Paradise Lost is now part of the Genesis story, which, again, why you're choosing a Catholic, I don't know. Or, no, Milton wasn't a Catholic. I think Milton was a Protestant. But anyway, not the point. You're choosing these fictions, and you're applying that information into the Bible and saying, well, say this is what happened. Yeah, you've now tied yourself into knots, and if you tie one knot loose, everything comes off. It's the tension of those giant boats, or those shipping boats. That line, which is harmless when it's sitting there, now that you have the tension of it holding the ship together, if you snap that line, it's going to cut you in half. You've created tension, you've created pressure where there wasn't any by adding all this other stuff to it and not looking at what the commentaries say, by not looking at what history says. You've built up the Bible into something that it isn't, into an idol, as some people used to say about Protestants. And I loved that line. And I think it's a great line. Once you built the Bible into an idol, you've lost the plot. You're no longer worshiping God. You're worshiping a book.
There was, especially in those days, in the college days, there was zero curiosity about whether or not I might be wrong.
Yeah.
You know, that wasn't even up for debate. There was full confidence and no curiosity. Mm-hmm. And I am in a very different place. I think those two things have reversed at this point in my life.
Right.
Very low confidence in my perspective.
I don't know. You still sound arrogant to me.
And high curiosity for all of this stuff.
Yeah, I feel like that's been happening to me over the past few years as well. And I think it's for the better. It's less entertaining and it's less fulfilling on a superficial level, because it's nice to be able to, even when you're just talking to somebody, it's nice to be able to, at dinner, when somebody asks you anything, right, here it is, I'll lay it out, here's my beliefs and here's why I think this, and let's have a discussion about it. It's less fulfilling to sort of go, you know what, man, I've got kind of no idea, but here are some thoughts.
All right, we're going to stop it there. Let's go to the outro music. Let's go to the big screen, shall we? I had it slightly off-angled. Let's see. There we go. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Thomas, where are you? I come back and you're not even here. This is so heartbreaking. Let me turn off the camera. Let me turn off the light. I want to thank B.S. Lewis for making an appearance. Eric, it's always appreciated. Santiago, you were great. I hope everyone has a great night. Thomas, wherever you are, I love you, buddy. I hope you're doing well. The live streams are going to be less and less, but they're still going to happen. I'm going to try to keep them happening at least once a month. I know I was trying for once a week, but I am so tired after a long week nowadays. When it comes to my topic stuff, I'll try to do at least one topic video a month as well. So the channel's still alive. It's not limping. It's still going forward. We're just going to be a little less frequent with the uploads and the streamings and the streams. All right. Remember what I say? Love God above all. God loves you. Love your neighbor. Love your enemy. Love yourself. Love God above all. God forgives you. So forgive your enemy. Forgive your neighbor. Forgive your family. And forgive yourself. And happy Easter. Should we say it? Should we do it? He has risen. Have a good night, everyone, and thank you so much for watching. I'll try to do another one of these later this week, so maybe we can finish this video. Later. Good night.
Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't stop me, you can't stop me now. Yeah, I will always be a warrior. You can't lock me, you can't lock me down. I will not lay down my arms, ready to be covered in scars. 'Cause I will always be a warrior. Late nights, get lost, hard work, the cost. Can't quit, can't stop, this world all cut off. Don't have time to waste, not now. Need to find a way to get out. 'Cause I'm gone in deep, get lost in the weeds. You know it's all about